Mayor Marty Walsh has barely been in office a year, but in that time, a lot of very big issues have crossed his desk. Finding a new school superintendent, historic crippling snowstorms, and the possibility of the Olympics coming to town. Mayor Walsh joins me now. Nice to see you, Mr. Mayor. How are you?
Very good.
So you're beginning the second year. What did you learn about yourself in the last 14 months you didn't know before? Anything?
This year is different than last.
No, I'm serious. Do you learn anything about how you are, how you relate to people, or anything like that?
I think the way I process things a little differently, and I think that I got criticized by some of the papers saying that I'm too slow in my process, but I think all the decisions we've made over the last year have been good as far as appointments and things like that, and I like where we're going.
Okay, so I want to talk, actually, you raised criticism. Let's talk about that for a second. The public still loves you, at least so far, at least according to the polls. But media, some criticism. Yvonne Abraham wrote a piece, I think, on Sunday in the Globe. You can't be both cheerleader and watchdog, Mr. Mayor, talking about your Olympics role. Does that stuff get under your skin?
No, it doesn't, but her article on Sunday was a great article because the speech I said, I was cheering about the Olympics, but talking about an opportunity even if we didn't get the Olympics. So that was missing out of the article that she wrote. But so I think there's an opportunity here to be a cheerleader. To go back to criticism, no. I mean, clearly,
do you read it all?
I read it all. I read almost every article. I get my press team sends me all the articles on me. I take out of those articles, I read them, I let them sink in and see what I have to fix, what I have to adjust.
Let's talk about that watchdog role. A couple things on the Olympics. You're quoted in the Globe when a bill was filed by a couple of your former State House colleagues to provide some legislative oversight. Here's what you had to say. If we need legislation to have transparency, then we should just forgo the bill altogether. Isn't that a little bit of an overreaction?
Well, I thought the bill at the time, and still to some degree, thought the bill was a little bit of overreaction. I think in the bill it talks about public money and using transportation money. That's a function of the legislature that they have to do when they're appropriating money. So it's within their control right now. When they talk about transparency, open the books, and the city books are open. It's an open book. I think when they're talking about they can't legislate having 2024 a private entity show documents when they're not public.
So the private part of it is what concerned you.
Yeah, and I just, and I was thinking it was reaction. Everyone's kind of jumping on the bandwagon. And I think that, and again, I've spoken to one of the authors of the bill. I'm going to have a meeting with the other person soon, the other rep, and they're all friends. I mean, I think a lot of people are reacting to a lot of uncertainty around the Olympics, and there's still a lot of questions that have to be answered. Primarily
financial uncertainty, and at one of the first community meetings you did in an attempt to allay that concern, here's what you said. I wouldn't sign any document that would make the city responsible for a $10 billion override or a $1 override. How do you reconcile that with the fact the International Olympic Committee requires that there be a guarantee signed by the leader of the city that gets it?
That's something that we're going to have to be creative on how we cover the city for any overruns or any costs that might happen if the Olympics were to go in a poor way.
But you have to sign a guarantee, don't you?
We'd have to sign a guarantee, but in that document, I will have guarantees in that it will protect the city of Boston. We did it in the USOC bid when we put in the insurance policy. If we back out of this bid or we get out of this bid, we owe the USOC $25 million. We put an insurance policy on the table for that. In Chicago, there was some money on the table, insurance money that covered overruns in Chicago. Not enough, but there was some money in that bid as well.
But just so I understand, you do have to. I know your commitment is no additional tax dollars.
Well, we have to sign.
But if you happen to be wrong and you have to sign this thing, the city, citizens, the taxpayers of Boston are on the hook, aren't they, Mr. Mayor?
When we talk about what we sign, it's what I sign, and I'm going to make sure the language in that does not hold the city harmless.
Meaning, wait, that does not require the taxpayers of Boston
to pay any type
if there's an overrun. And you think the International Olympic Committee will accept that?
We're going to see what happens as we move forward.
You said on a radio show when I wasn't there the other day, look at the smile on his face, that you said to a caller that you need somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% to feel, people of Boston supporting this, to feel good and proceed with this thing.
I gave a lot of people a lot of angst that day when I said the number of 70%, but I still think that as mayor of the city of Boston, if we want to make sure we have a good, productive games and we need to get support behind the Olympic game, and that's something that we have to be building on. Certainly, this week did not help us with getting support behind the Olympic Games, and I think it's important for us
because of these fees and
because of the fees and what's happening in the way that it's being portrayed in the paper, and the way that in reality, I should say. But people have to buy into the understanding that the Olympics is good for the city of Boston and good for us here, and that's my job to go out and talk about it. And if it's not good, then we shouldn't proceed with the Olympics.
How do you assess whether you oppose a ballot question? How do you assess whether or not
there is 70%? There's been polling at one point. The highest I think was 60%. 64, 65%.
It's now 44%.
Favorability, now it's down.
So polls are what you're talking about.
Polls are going up and down, and if there's a ballot question, we'll be able to see. But if the ballot question passes 51-49, all right, it passes, but does that mean that there's real big support behind the Olympics?
So you wouldn't go, if there was a ballot question and only passed 51-49 or 59-41, you wouldn't go ahead with this?
51-49, I'd have some serious concerns. 59-41, a little different
You
number.
mentioned this whole issue, and by the way, it's because of you saying to the Boston 2024, I want all these salaries, all these fees public. They made them public yesterday. Yeah. Michael Capuano, who's the congressperson that represents Boston, was on the radio with us today. Here's what he had to say about these numbers and this disclosure. Here he is.
I think it raises questions about whoever made the decision to make all those payments. It raises questions as to whether they would be good stewards of any public money if it were to come their way.
Doesn't he make a legitimate point? Even if it's private money now, it's a ton of dollars, tens of thousands. The former aides to Deval Patrick, current aide to Charlie Baker. Isn't he right about that?
I don't know if he's right about that. I wouldn't say he's necessarily right about that, because I think when you're talking about public money that's going to go into the Olympic bid, you're talking in two areas. The only two areas: transportation, infrastructure, which is needed, and also security, which is needed. And that's going to have to be a plan put in front of the legislature, or put a plan in front of MassDOT, and also a plan put in front of the federal government. So when you're talking about public money going into an Olympic bid, that's where the public money is going to go into. I think when it comes to investing in the Olympics long term, I certainly think that the organizer 2024 are going to have to look back at the balance sheet to see who's get paid, what their role is. Again, it's about what their role is, and if their role is to make sure that we have a 65% favorability, then we better change their role a little bit.
But you're a savvy guy. You know these numbers hurt. You intimated that
Absolutely.
before. They hurt the cause, at least temporarily.
But it's also important to get those numbers out there so people see the transparency.
Let's switch gears if we can for a minute. Tommy Chang is your school superintendent. Come July 1, 5-2 vote. He was your choice, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Did you make that clear to the committee before they voted?
I spoke to everyone, told him he was my choice, and a lot of people liked him. He was either everyone's first or second choice, as a lot of people were.
Paul Reville, former Secretary of Education on our radio show, said it was a substandard field, not that impressive.
I heard that.
Other editorialists said similar things. What do you know that they don't?
Tommy Chang is impressive, and I think people of Boston, once he starts to be introduced to Boston, and once we get him out and people talk to him, they're going to understand why I chose him. As a matter of fact, he wasn't just the only impressive candidate. I didn't agree with Paul. I said it on the radio show as well that day, that Pedro Martinez, Dana Benton, all good people that I thought were very impressive and could run this district. But I think Tommy Chang has that little extra to take this district to the next level.
Can you give us a very quick update on the casino situation? You have a lawsuit filed against the Everett. Is that just pending?
We're pending right there. That's where we are right now.
And so you intend to keep fighting this thing?
We're going to continue to fight it. I feel that Boston's a host community. I mean, there's still the plans and some of the filings that was due. They weren't done on time. The wind was. They were supposed to pass forward some more filings to the city of Boston a couple weeks ago. They didn't do it. We amended the complaint. We're working through a process. I think that at some point, if they want the casino, they're going to have a real conversation with the people of Boston, with the people of Charlestown, with the mayor's office.
Can we spend a final minute on this vast wasteland that is City Hall Plaza? You put out not your words, mine. You put out a quote request for ideas to do something with it. Give us the short version. What would you like to do with it?
I'm going to have some people. What I'd like to see happen there is something like a restaurant or areas for outside for entertainment as far as eating and being able to hang around. I'm looking at maybe putting a soccer field or a hockey rink in the middle so we could use it year-round, something like Rockefeller Center. We took we didn't, but they took the High Line in New York City, elevated train that people were saying, tear it down, and they put a park up there. So I want some bright ideas about what they can do with the brick patio at City Hall Plaza.
But you're giving up on blowing up the building itself?
It's just we can't do it right now. Too many other capital needs that we need in the city.
How are the ice dams on Tuttle?
They're gone off the tunnel, but
we
have big snow piles. No, they melted.
Mr. Mayor, it's good to see you.
Thank you
so much for your time. I appreciate it.